My billionaire husband stood up in that courtroom and called me sterile, said I'd wasted 5 years of his life. The whole room went silent. But when Judge Morrison opened that sealed envelope, honey, let me tell you, his face went white. And mine? I smiled for the first time in months. Before I tell you what was in that envelope, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because this story has more twists than a roller coaster. And trust me, you don't want to miss how karma served this man a cold plate of justice. Now let me take you back to where it all started. My name is Diane Thompson, and 6 years ago I thought I was living in a fairy tale. I was 31, running my own marketing consultancy, and doing pretty well for myself. But then I met Trevor Montgomery at a charity gala in Atlanta. This man walked into that ballroom like he owned it, and honestly, with an $800 million tech empire to his name, he practically did. He had this presence, you know, the kind that made everyone turn and look. But what got me wasn't the money or the power. It was the way he looked at me when we started talking, like I was the only person in that entire room. We talked for 3 hours straight that night, about everything, our dreams, our families, our struggles coming up in a world that didn't always make space for us. He told me about building his company from nothing, working 3 jobs to get through college. I told him about losing my father young and how it made me fierce about building my own security. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without hesitation. That should have been my first clue that I was already falling. 6 months later, we were in Paris. Trevor got down on one knee in front of the Eiffel Tower with a ring that could probably fund a small country. I said yes before he even finished asking. My mother cried happy tears for the first time since my father passed. My best friend Ronnie told me I deserved every bit of this happiness. And I believed it. God, I really believed it. The wedding was everything you'd imagine. 300 guests, a dress that cost more than my first car, and a reception that made it into all the society pages. Trevor's mother, Dorothy, gave a speech about how lucky her son was to find a woman of substance. I remember holding Trevor's hand under the table and thinking, this is it. This is the life I've been working toward. We honeymooned in Bali for 3 weeks, and when we came back, we moved into this beautiful house with 6 bedrooms. 6 bedrooms for the family we were going to build together. That first year, everything felt possible. We'd lay in bed on Sunday mornings talking about baby names. Trevor wanted a boy he could name after his grandfather. I wanted a little girl I could dress up and teach to be strong. We picked out which room would be the nursery. We even painted it yellow because we wanted it to be a surprise. When nothing happened after 6 months, we laughed it off. These things take time, right? That's what everyone says. But then 6 months turned into a year, and laughter turned into concern. I started tracking my cycles, taking vitamins, doing everything the internet told me to do. Trevor would come home from work and ask if today was a good day, and I'd check my app and nod, and we'd try again. It started feeling less like love and more like a job, but I told myself it would be worth it when we finally saw those 2 pink lines. Year 2, we went to the doctors. I remember sitting in that cold office while they ran test after test. Blood work, ultrasounds, procedures that made me feel less like a person and more like a science experiment. But every single test came back the same way. I was fine, perfectly healthy, ovulating normally, everything working exactly as it should. The doctor suggested Trevor get tested too, just to rule everything out. He nodded in that office, but when we got to the car, he got angry. Said he didn't need some doctor questioning his manhood. Said we just needed to keep trying, be patient, have faith. I didn't push it. I should have, but I didn't. I was still trying to be the supportive wife, you know, the woman who stands by her man and doesn't make waves. Looking back now, I want to shake that version of myself and tell her to wake up. Year 3 is when Trevor changed. It was gradual at first, like watching a sunset in reverse. The warmth just slowly drained away. He started working later and later, business trips that used to be 2 days stretched into a week. When he was home, he was distant, distracted. His phone was always face down on the table, and he'd take calls in the other room. At family dinners, his mother started making comments, little jabs disguised as concern. Still no grandchildren? Well, I suppose these things happen to some women. Trevor never defended me. He'd just stare at his plate and stay quiet. I started to feel like a failure, like my whole purpose had been reduced to this one thing I couldn't seem to do. I threw myself into work, landed 3 major clients, doubled my revenue. But none of it mattered because I couldn't give my husband a child. That's what the silence in our house told me every single day. Year 4, I hired a private investigator. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. A woman knows when something isn't right. Her name was Candace Williams, 27 years old, worked in Trevor's marketing department. The investigator sent me photos of them at hotels, restaurants, her apartment. In one photo, Trevor had his hand on her stomach, and she was smiling up at him like he'd hung the moon. That's when I knew it wasn't just an affair. She was pregnant. I confronted him on a Tuesday night. He didn't even try to lie, just looked at me with this cold expression I'd never seen before and said, "She can give me what you can't." 5 years of marriage, and that's what it came down to. I asked him how far along she was, and he said 4 months. 4 months of him coming home to me, kissing me goodnight, pretending we were still working on our family together. 4 months of lies stacked on top of 3 years of distance. He filed for divorce that Friday, had his lawyers draw up papers citing irreconcilable differences. There was a prenup, of course. I'd signed it in the haze of engagement bliss, never thinking I'd actually need to worry about it. It stated that if the marriage ended, I'd get a small settlement and walk away clean. His attorneys were already preparing their strategy. Paint me as the gold digger who trapped him, couldn't give him children, and now wanted to take him for everything. They were good at their job. Within a week, stories started appearing on social media, anonymous sources claiming I'd been obsessed with his money from day one. Friends we'd had over for dinner parties suddenly couldn't remember my name. But I had Mrs. Barbara Lawson on my side. She was 63 years old, had been practicing family law for 35 years, and didn't lose cases. When I walked into her office broken and defeated, she looked me in the eye and said, "Honey, wipe those tears. We're about to go to war, and I don't plan on losing." She told me to document everything. Every text message, every credit card statement, every single piece of evidence I could find. And then she told me to search his office at home while he was on his next business trip. I felt like a criminal going through Trevor's things, but I'm so glad I did. In his safe, the one he thought I didn't know the combination to, I found medical records. Test results from Princeton Fertility Clinic dated 3 years ago. 3 years. The report was clear. Severe oligospermia. That means extremely low sperm count. The doctor's notes said natural conception would be nearly impossible without intervention. Trevor had known for 3 years that he was the reason we couldn't have a baby. 3 years of letting me think it was my fault. 3 years of watching me cry, blame myself, feel broken. 3 years of lying to my face. I took photos of everything and sent them to Mrs. Lawson. She called me an hour later and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Oh, we've got him now." The court date came faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before, kept rehearsing in my mind how it would go, what he would say, what I would feel, but nothing could have prepared me for walking into that courtroom and seeing him sitting there with his attorney, Gerald Banks, looking so confident, so sure he was going to win. His whole family was there. His mother sat right behind him wearing pearls and judgment. Candace wasn't there, though. Interesting. Judge Morrison walked in, and everyone stood. She was a black woman in her 50s with silver hair and an expression that said she'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. I'd heard she was fair, but tough. I was counting on the tough part. Trevor's attorney went first. Painted this picture of his client as a devoted husband who'd tried everything to make the marriage work. A successful businessman who'd provided a wonderful life for his wife. A man who desperately wanted children but married a woman who, unfortunately, couldn't give them to him. Then Trevor took the stand. He sat there in his expensive suit, speaking in that smooth voice that used to make me melt, and told his version of events. He talked about how much he'd wanted a family, how he'd been patient and supportive, how he'd encouraged me to see the best doctors. And then he said it. Looking right at Judge Morrison, he said, "Your Honor, I married a woman who turned out to be sterile. 5 years of my life wasted on someone who couldn't fulfill the basic purpose of marriage. The courtroom went dead silent. I felt every eye turn to look at me. Trevor's mother was nodding like he'd just said something profound. His attorney was shuffling papers with a satisfied look, and I just sat there, gripping the edge of the table, feeling like I'd been slapped. Mrs. Lawson reached over and squeezed my hand. She leaned close and whispered, "Hold on, baby. We're about to flip this whole thing." When it was our turn, Mrs. Lawson stood up slowly. She buttoned her jacket and walked toward the judge with this calm confidence that made the whole room shift. "Your Honor," she said, "everything you just heard was a lie. And I have proof." She held up a manila envelope, sealed and official-looking. "These are medical records from Princeton Fertility Clinic. I'd like to submit them as evidence." Trevor's face changed. Just for a second, I saw panic flash across it before he covered it with confusion. His attorney objected, but Judge Morrison overruled him. She took the envelope, opened it carefully, and started reading. I watched her face change. Her eyebrows went up. Her jaw tightened. She looked from the papers to Trevor and back again. Then she looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that felt like vindication. "Mr. Montgomery," Judge Morrison said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "according to these medical records dated 3 years ago, you were diagnosed with severe oligospermia. The notes indicate you were told natural conception would be nearly impossible. Were you aware of this diagnosis?" The courtroom exploded. People were whispering, gasping, turning to their neighbors. Trevor's attorney jumped up demanding to know where we got those records. Trevor's mother had her hand over her mouth. And Trevor? Trevor just sat there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. "That's private medical information," he finally stammered. "She had no right—" "Answer the question, Mr. Montgomery," Judge Morrison cut him off. "Were you aware of this diagnosis?" "Yes, but—" "And did you share this information with your wife?" Silence. "Mr. Montgomery?" "No, Your Honor." Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair and looked at him with pure disgust. "So let me understand this correctly. You knew for 3 years that you were the reason your marriage wasn't producing children. You let your wife undergo numerous medical tests and procedures. You let her believe she was the problem. You let your family blame her, and then you stood in my courtroom and called her sterile? Your Honor, it's not that simple." "It seems very simple to me, Mr. Montgomery." She looked down at the papers again. "And there's more here. Mrs. Lawson, would you like to elaborate?" Mrs. Lawson stood back up, and I swear she looked like an angel of justice. "Your Honor, if you look at the dates, Ms. Williams became pregnant approximately 4 months ago. Given Mr. Montgomery's diagnosis and the timeline of his affair, we have reason to believe that child isn't biologically his. We've subpoenaed Ms. Williams to testify, but she's been conveniently unreachable." The gasps got louder. Trevor's attorney was on his feet arguing about relevance, but Judge Morrison silenced him with one look. She turned to Trevor, and her voice was ice cold. "Mr. Montgomery, you came into my courtroom and committed fraud. You attempted to manipulate these proceedings with lies. You emotionally abused your wife for years, and you did it all while cheating on her and hiding medical information that was crucial to your marriage." She closed the folder and looked at both attorneys. "Here's how this is going to go. The prenuptial agreement is invalidated due to fraud and misrepresentation. Mrs. Thompson will receive 60% of all marital assets. Mr. Montgomery will pay alimony for 5 years at an amount commensurate with the lifestyle he provided during the marriage, and he will be responsible for all of Mrs. Thompson's legal fees. Furthermore, I'm recommending that Mrs. Thompson pursue a civil suit for emotional distress. This court is adjourned." She banged her gavel, and it was over, just like that. 5 years of lies, destroyed in 5 minutes of truth. Trevor tried to talk to me as we left the courtroom, tried to explain, to apologize, to somehow make sense of what he'd done. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I didn't know this man at all. Maybe I never had. I walked past him without saying a word. There was nothing left to say. The aftermath was messy but satisfying. Trevor's business partners started distancing themselves. No one wants to work with a man who lies about something so fundamental. Candace sued him for fraud when it came out that the baby wasn't his. She'd been sleeping with someone else, too. His whole perfect image crumbled. Meanwhile, I took my settlement and expanded my marketing firm, hired 10 new employees, landed contracts with some of the biggest companies in the country, built something real on a foundation that couldn't be shaken because it was mine. You know what I learned through all of this? The truth always comes to light. Trevor tried to make me feel broken, worthless, less than, but all along he was the one living a lie. That envelope didn't just contain medical records, it contained my vindication, my freedom, my future. It proved that I was never the problem. I was never broken. I was just married to a coward who couldn't face his own truth, so he tried to bury me in his lies instead. To every woman out there being made to feel like you're not enough, document everything, trust your gut, and never let anyone dim your light. Your worth isn't tied to someone else's lies. You are not defined by what someone else says you lack. You are whole, complete, and powerful exactly as you are. If this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever discovered a truth that changed everything? I read every single one. And remember, the next video drops in 3 days, and trust me, that story is just as wild. Until then, stay strong, stay smart, and never settle for less than you deserve. I'm Diane, and this was my truth.